Have you read the news? Have you let it get you yet? People there are saying how bad it's gonna get. And I've been calling to the sky, please don't let more bullets fly. Have you heard the talk of the cities and the towns? There's a fear from the inside and the toil all around. I've been hoping for my help, find the cure to come and sail. In these times of struggle, you can hear the children cry. Hello, my fellow.
Hi, critical thinkers. It's time to shake the corporate cobwebs off the gray matter and join us for another brain workout I like to call Mixed Mental Arts for Intellectual Self-Defense. I am Brad Hartley, and this is Critical Mass TV for Sunday, March 30th, 2014. We're live from the amazing VCAM studios in beautiful Burlington, Vermont. Before I get on my brief rant and roll here, I want to give a huge shout out to the hundreds of people that turned out yesterday in support of the striking CCTA bus drivers. Folks from all walks of life were both evident and enthusiastic in their recognition of the importance of organized labor in the continuing struggle for a just and sustainable world. If I were a negotiator, I would demand that if video surveillance of drivers is necessary for efficient operation, then all management and executives must also submit to being videoed all day, every day. Let's see how they spend their time and earn their salaries. By the way, my opinions, of course, are always my own and not necessarily the views of the guests or the station, although I think they should be. Okay, back to the business we have at hand here. Tonight, my two wonderful guests and I are going to do what few in the media dare to. We are actually going to tackle the 800-pound gorilla in the room. And you have to forgive the anthropomorphizing, but the gorilla is this. 97% of climate scientists worldwide realize that global warming and climate change are the result of human industrial activity. Millions of the world's people are demanding action based on the already obviously observable effects. So why are we not only avoiding structural changes to leverage our own survival as a species, but actually increasing the behaviors that are causing the dysfunction in the first place? Now, simply put, I mean the feverish and massive push by the fossil fuels industry to extract and burn every bit of subsurface coal, oil, and gas, which happens to be, unfortunately, at least 5 times what it would take to push us off the proverbial climate cliff. This gorilla, in my opinion, sits in all corporate boardrooms and halls of government. It quietly sits as our ruling classes solidify their society based on greed, where maximizing their own gain is sacrosanct regardless of the cost to the rest of us. In all failed civilizations and in our own present systems, there is one glaring blind spot. Never has there been a society that wasn't ruled by a tiny, self-interested elite. Never have working people, farmers, scientists, and specialists been empowered to do the hard work of creating cultures that embrace enlightened, collective existence. The infamous 1970s Trilateral Commission report entitled "The Crisis of Democracy" illustrates the elite view better than we ever could. Corporate democracy is only in crisis when people like you and I actually participate in it. Activism does rattle the gorilla's cage. Okay, so if you know me, you know I get a little bit carried away on occasion. So right now I'm going to introduce my guests and we will get on with our discussion for tonight. So please welcome Fred Kosnitsky, who teaches environmental studies at the Community College of Vermont, and Kelley, who is a returning guest and activist with the environmental justice group Rising Tide Vermont. So, hi there. Thanks for coming on.
Great to be here, Brad.
I really appreciate it. Hi, Kira.
Good to see you again.
Yeah. We have a video that we're going to play first here before we start our discussion, and then we will take it from there. So, Jim, could you play that first video for me, please?
It all started with a big bang. Wait, we don't have to go back that far. The Earth was formed 4.5 billion years ago. No, it's still too far. Try this. It's the Middle Ages. People in Britain run out of firewood, start burning coal. But they use up the coal on the ground. Miners dig deep. Coal mines fill with water. Samuel Newcomen invents a coal-burning steam engine to pump out water so miners can keep digging. James Watt makes it practical for other uses. Now we have ingredients for the Industrial Revolution, fossil fuels, and a way to put them to work. All hell breaks loose. Coal miners bog down lugging coal. Rails make it easier. Rails and steam engine combined make a railroad. Michael Faraday makes the first electric motor. Nikola Tesla invents alternating current. Soon utility companies start burning coal to generate electricity. Meanwhile, Edwin Drake drills the first rock oil well in Pennsylvania, and Carl Daimler builds an automobile running on petroleum. Coal tar and oil are turned into industrial chemicals and pharmaceuticals that prolong life, more population growth. The Wright brothers start oil-fueled aviation. Fritz Haber and Karl Bosch make fertilizer from fossil fuels. Fertilizer and oil-powered tractors expand food production, feeding more people. World War I is the first fossil-fueled conflict. Then comes World War II, giving us guided missiles and atom bombs. In between is a Great Depression, partly caused by overproduction. Powered assembly lines make products faster than people need them. Advertising executives invent consumerism to soak up overproduction. It's the 1950s. Advertisers use television to hook new generations of consumers. In the 70s, there's an oil shock. Everyone's shocked to realize how dependent they are on oil. With the energy crisis, the environmental movement is born. But oil prices fall and everyone forgets energy shortages. There's a showdown between market and planned economies. Market wins. Goodbye, evil Soviet empire. Politicians decide the market will solve everything. Personal computers arrive. Globalization takes over when the market notices labor is cheaper in China. Suddenly everyone has a cell phone, but world oil production stalls out. China is now burning half the world's coal to make export products. But where will China get more coal and oil to fuel more growth? Environmental problems everywhere. Rising CO2 levels lead to record heat waves, floods, droughts. Oceans acidify. Topsoil erodes by 25 billion tons a year from industrial agriculture. Ancient forests disappear. Species go extinct at 1,000 times normal rates. Fresh water is scarce or polluted. Oil companies drill in miles of seawater because the easy oil is gone. But a deep water oil platform explodes and fouls the Gulf of Mexico. Manufacturing moves to polluting countries where labor is cheap, while the U.S. becomes a casino. The financial sector is 40% of the economy. But Wall Street is over-leveraged. Banks fail. Unemployment soars. Credit evaporates. The economy is on the verge of collapse. Okay, present time. It's amazing how far we've come in 200 years, just 3 human lifetimes, from the beginning of industrialism till now. But where are we headed? We can't keep doubling human population. We can't keep dumping carbon in the atmosphere. We can't keep ruining topsoil. We can't keep growing population and consumption or basing our economy on depleting fossil fuels. We can't just print more money to solve the debt crisis. It's been an exhilarating ride, but there are limits. Now, it's not the end of the world, but we have to do 4 things fast. Learn to live without fossil fuels, adapt to the end of economic growth as we've known it, support 7 billion humans and stabilize population at a sustainable level, and deal with our legacy of environmental destruction. In short, we have to live within nature's budget of renewable resources at rates of natural replenishment. Can we do it? We have no choice. Alternative energy sources are important, but none can fully replace fossil fuels in the time we have. Also, we've designed and built our infrastructure for transport, electricity, and farming to suit oil, coal, and gas. Changing to different energy sources will require us to redesign cities, manufacturing processes, healthcare, and more. We'll also have to rethink some of our cultural values. None of our global problems can be tackled in isolation, and many cannot be fully solved. We have to prepare for business as unusual. Our best goal is resilience, the ability to absorb shocks and keep going. If we do nothing, we still get to a post-carbon future, but it will be bleak. However, if we plan the transition, we can have a world that supports robust communities of healthy, creative people and ecosystems with millions of other species. One way or the other, we're in for the ride of a lifetime. Understand the issues and pitch in. It's all hands on deck.
So that's a very interesting video from Richard there. The portrayal is interesting. He's certainly not calling for dissent in the streets and calling for like open activism. I guess per se, it seems that his editorial slant on that is a little bit that we can have an industrial economy if we somehow transition to a world of renewable resources, more use of renewable energy sources. Sort of like implying in the end there that our lifestyles wouldn't have to change that radically. We saw the train and the beautiful city and the end of that and stuff. What do you think, Fred? Do you think that's possible with the amount of energy that we expend nowadays? Is it possible to transition,
Well, I think we're going to have to really rethink how we live. That for us to sustain ourselves on the planet, and by us I mean not just us here in Vermont and here in the Western industrialized world, but on the entire planet, those of us who are the rich, the affluent nations of the world, are going to have to live a simpler lifestyle. It doesn't mean a less satisfying and wonderful existence. It means that the wonderfulness of our existence is not going to be based solely on how much stuff we have. And for those who are living on the planet with not enough stuff, we have to be engaged in the process of helping them to develop so that they can lead healthy, productive lives where there's dignity, where there's education, where there's sanitation, where there's health care. So it's this process of kind of convergence of those of us who are using too much ramping down, those of us who have too little getting help ramping up, and meeting somewhere in the middle. Exactly where that sustainable point is, it's hard to know. Exactly what population the planet will support, we don't really know yet. But my suspicion is it's going to be less than the 7 billion we have now. Population will continue to grow over this next half century or so, but at some point it's going to level off, either because we're smart about how we develop our population, or nature will strike back. And population will get under control through lots of death and human misery,
Right.
which is not the way we want it to happen. But I think eventually to find a carrying capacity on the planet that's sustainable in the long run with a decent standard of living for all the peoples on the earth, we're going to have to lower population at some point. We're also going to have to power ourselves in different ways. That
Yeah.
it's time to start leaving fossil fuels in the ground and finding other more sustainable ways to help us lead these prosperous lives.
Yeah, which gets to back again to the 800-pound gorilla is if we all were in a participating democratic group of societies worldwide and we could actually have open and honest conversations like we do at the family and group level. I mean, very, very few family members would let one person eat everything out of the refrigerator and throw everybody else out on the porch and use, and dominate their other people in their family group in that way. So one of the, we're going to get back to always to that, the 800-pound gorilla is the domination of a very, very tiny group of people that do primarily own the corporate structure, and with that massive amount of wealth, they own our political structures. So, I mean, that seems to be the paradigm that's going to have to shift, which leads us to Kira a little bit, and groups like Rising Tide, and the seems to be like the necessity of using our dollars to vote, which is one democratic thing we do every day, is we decide how we want the world to look by the way we spend our money in a real way, but is somehow resisting and demonstrating and actually forming some challenges to like political power. Is that an important part of the mix that we have to start now? I guess you can see where my viewpoint is. I think we do need to.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. We have, I think the problem with even that video that we just saw, like, it's great at identifying the problems, but then in terms of identifying the solutions, like, unfortunately, the dominant cultural ideas of, changing things by doing boycotts or peaceful protests or petitioning your local government. Recycling is the example I go to all the time. They're distractions. They're not, not anything more than an individual solution. And, I think that people like to keep us on that individual level, acting as individual levels, because that gorilla, if I were to take on a gorilla by myself, who would win?
Right.
Right? But so keeping all of these solutions at the individual level, like you individually write a letter to your senator and that'll help. Like
right.
You individually compulsively sort your recycling. And so then even well-intentioned, great videos like the one that we just saw that tell us what the problem are, they aren't able to tell us how to attack that problem without being shut down or, like they're not allowed to get airtime or to access people. They're not allowed because of the way that our media and the way that our society controls what information is taught to young children or what information is presented on, everyday television. We were having a conversation once, I think a while ago, about what would happen if they taught about unions and labor rights, and this is really prevalent with the bus strike that's going on. Like, what if they taught that in schools? Like, what if kids were taught how to organize and how to fight for rights? And there's nothing in any history textbook about the struggle for the 8-hour
They could help to run their schools by organizing together and deciding agendas and deciding goals and meeting those and learning how to control their own destinies.
Right.
But that's not a part of the curriculum. It's more staying in rows and obeying authority blindly.
Because who controls the
Not
curriculum?
Everybody, of course. Right.
The curriculum is controlled by this dominant gorilla who wants to keep everybody in these rows and these orders. And
conventional thought. And Noam Chomsky has a great term for the atomization of all of us. The media and a lot of the aspects of the educational system and just society in general wants to keep us all atomized. And it's the collective, it's the organizing together is where human beings get power, which is why the people that are at the very top of the income brackets are the most highly organized human beings on earth. They do communicate a lot, and they do focus on those corporate agendas and their narrow political agendas more than than we can imagine. So then that's why they're highly organized, because it works.
Right.
So, so we've sort of identified that there's, and the video did a good job of that, of there's economic drivers behind the use of fossil fuels. It's, you know, it's always, we've gone from one cheap energy source, you know, timber to whale oil to petroleum. You know, we're really used to having unlimited cheap energy that we can just blow through like it's a, you know, like a toga party at the frat house or whatever. But, and which sort of boils down to the basic golden rule is they that have all the gold make all the rules. You know, I think everybody is aware of that. So, I mean, Fred, do you, and you know, assuming that you agree with some of that, I was just wondering, you know, so there's economic drivers, but it's really, it seems to be like really difficult to control those billions of people that, you know, if we were given the opportunity to vote on whether we want to, you know, burn enough carbon so we jump off that climate cliff, I bet many people would vote no to that. What do you think?
Well, we can only hope that that's how they would be voting. I've been doing some thinking about how to frame the whole climate change issue and the fact that after 20, 25, 30 years of us increasingly knowing the science, knowing the impacts, knowing that we're really threatening our own survival, that climate change is not just about polar bears having less sea ice or about, you know, the weather changing and maybe, you know, sap makers, syrup makers will have a bad season. What we're talking about is immense levels of catastrophe and misery, human misery and death. Some of us in Vermont have already felt some direct effects, you know, from the big storms we've had and flooding. People all around the United States are suffering from droughts and other climate impacts. So this is not just an issue that's affecting the environment, but it's already having massive direct impacts on people, and that's just going to continue to get worse and worse. So, you know, when President Clinton said during his presidency, it's the economy, stupid, somehow we have to change that message to it's our survival, stupid.
Yeah.
And get people to realize that we are in a war. We are in a war. On one side, you have those folks who are fighting a battle for their existence, the fossil fuel companies. They're fighting for their existence because they know sometime down the road, using carbon, using fossil fuels is going down the toilet. But like the tobacco companies, when we found out how bad smoking was for you, they fought tooth and nail for decades and decades to keep their business alive.
While they developed foreign markets for all those products.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the fossil fuel companies are doing the same thing. They know that what they're doing is destroying their planet, but they're doing their best to deny it or distort it or misinform people because they're fighting for their existence. Unfortunately, those of us who are being fried in this warming planet, we haven't yet realized that we're in a fight for our existence. Some of us know it, and until we get people at large knowing it like in their guts, that it's not just an intellectual thing, and if we could vote, we'd vote to stop carbon.
Right.
When people feel threatened, when their very existence is threatened, they get willing to go to war. When our country went to war in World War II, people all got around a common cause, and people sacrificed.
There was an obvious threat.
Right, and women went to the factories, and men went off to war because there's an obvious threat threatening our existence. Well, we have that threat now, but we don't quite know it. It's still that 800-pound gorilla.
Yeah.
So I think somehow we have to figure out psychologically, whether it's individual psychology or mass psychology, why we don't quite get it yet. And I think that's going to be a real interesting challenge for not only the climate movement, but lots of other environmental justice movements, social justice movements, is getting people to really get it, to realize that it's our survival, stupid, that we're really being threatened here.
I think we have to break through the wall and the cage of, and I've said it, I say it over and over, but it's not just timid, tepid corporate domination. It's absolute corporate domination of almost every aspect of every human being's life, and by controlling the political processes, and something like Citizens United only turbocharged that in our own country by unleashing unlimited corporate money into our political process at the federal level, but control of the media and control of the messages and viewpoints you get from Hollywood, TV, and print media. So if you control the information that we're exposed to, there's a tremendous amount of power in that, because we don't know what we've never heard. I mean, there has to have so many people being affected and so little action on the ground being taken so far, other than the incredible amounts of pipelines that are being built, the Koch brothers running rampant with their Tea Party nonsense, the refineries expanding just incredibly, and the petroleum coke issue, which I've never hardly even heard that much about, but all the byproduct of processing the Alberta tar sands oil, just the waste product itself is being marketed by William Koch, who's now the world's largest pet coke dealer, and the Chinese are one of the major customers. But it seems there's a lot of seduction in the media about all of the products and the lifestyles and everything that we're exposed to day after day. Kind of, you're sort of like watching the hypnotic watch swing. These are all the images of wealth that we need to live up to, and we have a value system, like you said, that's based on material possessions. We're judging our own value as human beings by how much stuff we've got. But it wouldn't. One obvious method is to get a little bit of control of our own information. To develop alternative media. None of this is easy, or it would already be happening. So the economic order that's large and vast and very, very powerful is controlling us. But it's interesting to figure out what to do. We sort of have to understand the mechanisms by which we're being manipulated.
Interestingly, in this past year, there's been a book out about the making of the movie Network, a movie from back in the 70s, where the protagonist famously, opens up his window and shouts out, "I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore." And I think we have to somehow get people mad that we're getting screwed over in this whole climate change scenario. Whether it's already affected us directly or not, pretty soon it will. And it's definitely going to be affecting our kids and our grandkids and the generations that come after them. So we all have this really high personal stake in it, and not all of us have realized that yet. But once we do, we can start getting mad as hell and make the changes. One thing that's particularly dangerous, I think, about the whole climate issue is that with former movements, whether it's women's right to vote or the feminist movement or the civil rights movement or the anti-tobacco movement, it could be a long battle, and eventually, if you stuck with it, people would realize that it's the good fight and you can win the battle. With climate change, the things we're doing to the atmosphere are happening so fast, and the window of opportunity to at least pull back enough that we don't cause total breakdown of our climate system, it's a pretty small window that we have left. Within the next decade or 2 decades, we have to make some really major shifts in how we as a species do business on Earth. And so we don't have the time to keep waiting for more and more people to feel the impacts directly. We have to trust that as a species, with our brains, we can have some foresight and realize, whoa, we better stop this before it gets past that tipping point of we're really have done ourselves in.
Because, one way or another, we're going to get to we're going to get to a carbon-free future. It'd be a lot better to transition intelligently than to to get into total chaos and collapse of things that like civilization that we've come
Right.
to appreciate.
Right.
One way or another, it's going to happen. So,
I think that's one of the important things to realize with that, and with that goal in mind of this sort of complete overhaul transition. Like there's two ways that a population can decline. Either they can control their birth rates, or they can control, and have less of them, or their death rates can be controlled by some outside force. So we want to actively control, like using the population metaphor as a metaphor for consumption. We could either consume less because we make that conscious decision as a society and on like regulatory levels to intake less, or that decision will be made for us because there'll be nothing left to
Right.
consume. So one of those is obviously a much better option. But I think that the reason that it's so hard to get people to see, like to get society to acknowledge and recognize this problem and to face it, is that the system that we have now provides so many spaces for people to go to ignore this. So
It
many.
does.
We're, like you said, we're being so distracted, and the system that we live in makes it very hard for us to find any sort of space to live outside of that system and to sort of take a step back and process everything and say, whoa, like this is really not important. Like this is important, and since we're just fed so. We're just so force-fed what is important and what isn't, that it's really hard. It becomes incredibly difficult as a society, as a collective, to collectivize around priorities that are not part of the
Yeah.
mainstream diction.
I remember just during our local, the events surrounding our local Occupy Vermont, period when Occupy Wall Street was spreading rapidly around the country and around the world. There was encampments and a lot of honest conversations about corporate domination and the collapse of the financial sector, and just how all these issues intersect, and the convergence of everything coming together between political control by corporations, and then their behaviors themselves, and environmental damage. But we had a lot of vigorous, enlightening conversations about what struck us everywhere. And here, of course, state kind of police repression broke up every single encampment, I think, eventually in the United States that I know of. Even it happened here in Burlington. But one thing that we all realized very quickly, was there was no public space. There was nowhere that we could go as a group of, say, a couple hundred people and have a conversation out of the weather. I mean, there does not exist a space. And if you look at the discussions about this Moran plant down here, there's not even a glimmer of a conversation about a space that people could use en masse to facilitate some organizational structures or to help us organize. I mean, if you get right down to that level, there is no place. The park was it. It's a little rough once the snow starts flying and the cops start shooting stuff at you and whatnot. Mm-hmm. So I mean, that was really a glaring obvious thing that I noticed out of Occupy, is that it was extremely hard to have those conversations with more than a dozen people at a time.
Mm-hmm. If I might, I'd like to go back to that war analogy. And I don't think I'm using war as a metaphor here. I'm feeling like we're really at war. It's a different kind of war, partly because the enemy is, let's say the enemy is the fossil fuel companies, and the other side, our side, the good side, is everybody. Mm-hmm. But we are also the enemy. We are combatants for the fossil fuel companies because they've been very, very successful in providing us with lots of comforts, lots of convenience, and the use of fossil fuels has been useful for the human race. Now that we found out that using it the way we do, we're threatening our own existence, we have to somehow wean ourselves off of that thought that, oh, fossil fuels are good. Fossil fuels are good for the economy. Fossil fuels are good because it keeps my house warm. Fossil fuels are good because I can drive as much as I want to drive. We have to make that shift that instead of fighting on the side of the enemy, we need to be fighting against the enemy.
Yeah, I completely get
yeah,
you.
that we're on both sides of the battle, and
Right.
the enemy is on the other side, but they've got us fighting for them as well as against
Yeah.
them.
We're being used to like
Right.
fight against ourselves.
We're like the cannon fodder
Yeah.
in this war.
There's also a lot of parallels and metaphors with a basic addiction theory, where
Right.
the society and the economy, and of course the leadership, is highly addicted to the mountains and mountains of money that they can generate, because the wealth buys them the power that they crave and lust after, which is very, very drug-like. And then we, in our own little ways, begin to crave those same kinds of feelings and that same kind of power over, even if it's just over our, our homes, but then the enablers that are all allowing, just passively allowing and feeding, the whole addictive thing. It's very dysfunctional and very, very similar to drug addiction in a very large scale.
Sure.
And it's hard to break out of that,
Yeah. And in the war analogy, are we going to be the resistance, or are we going to be the collaborators? And right now, we're a little bit of each, but we need to choose sides a little more strongly, I think.
Yeah.
And get on the side of resisting for our survival.
So Fred, you picked out a good video that I think really sums up a lot of at least in a good satirical way, the corporate viewpoint. So, hey Jim, could you play that second video that we lined up, sir?
As a company, we have an absolute commitment to the principle of action on climate change. We're very proud of our values.
But as one of the major contributors to CO2 emissions, and as we begin to contend with the real-world effects of climate change, we have to prepare ourselves for the next step in addressing our corporate responsibilities in this area.
While the steps on the surface seem to be in opposition to our self-interest, the reality is, however, that they are actually in opposition to our self-interest.
So we recognise what we call the gap.
The gap is the problem of simultaneously holding two contradictory positions.
On one hand, to act on our responsibility to humanity, but on the other hand, to deliver on our commitment to superior value for our shareholders.
We needed to take a leap of faith.
An intuitive step outside of the limitations of science-based argument.
I'm proud to announce the company's new policy of fuck you. Fuck you is more than a policy. It's a philosophy where we're able to straddle the dichotomy between what we know is true and how we can benefit by ignoring that truth.
Fuck you means we can be passionate about our values, but not act on them.
Fuck you takes what would be our present-day financial burden away from us and transforms it into a chronic economic, social, cultural and political crisis for future generations.
The genius of this, however, is that we transferred it away from us.
It ensures solid returns to our shareholders by killing their grandchildren.
With this policy, we delay action and leverage the gap, and are able to maintain our role as a global leader in destroying the planet.
Ultimately, this is a reflection of the values of our shareholders. Everyday Australians have chosen to invest $20 billion into the company, but we prefer to think of it as 20 billion fuck yous to the Australians of tomorrow.
There will come a day when my moral choices will no longer be beholden to the shareholders, and a wave of profound regret and a sorrow will engulf me as I realise with painful clarity the enormity of the damage I have perpetrated upon humanity. And even if I plead with whoever has succeeded my role in the company to stop putting CO2 in the air for the sake of my daughter's grandchildren, he or she can turn to me and simply respond with, "Fuck you." And that legacy really does make me very proud.
Investing in. Well, I guess as far as, obvious depiction of corporate greed and the insatiable nature of like greed and power, you just you couldn't sum it up better than that. I mean.
Yeah, I found it to be both funny and really, really sad at the same time.
Yeah.
You know, the little tagline at the end of, what are you investing in?
Yeah.
I know here in Vermont, students at a number of universities and colleges have been working hard to present arguments to their trustees to divest from fossil fuel investments. I know at UVM, the Board of Trustees shot down that proposal.
And Middlebury College.
And elsewhere. I know at the State House just recently, a Senate committee killed a bill that would have divested the state pension funds for teachers and municipal and state employees. And I'm using words like shot down and killed because this is a war. And these things in the overall war may seem like just teeny little skirmishes. Oh, so the state pension fund didn't divest of fossil fuels, or University of Vermont still has fossil fuels in their portfolio. But it's a big deal because it's decision makers at these institutions, whether it's the administration and the legislature for the state government of Vermont, or whether it's the boards of trustees at these major both public and private institutions in the state, they're basically saying fuck you too.
Yeah.
They're we could say, well, they're trying to be careful with their money, or they're being cautious, but it's not. It's cowardice. It's cowardice to realize that if we pull the money out of fossil fuel investments, the portfolios are going to do just as well. In the long run, they may do better because these carbon-based industries are on the decline rather than on the incline.
Like we said, their assets are going to get stranded one way or another.
One way or another.
They're going to get
and
stranded.
if we take the money out of these industries and reinvest it in the industries that are going to help mitigate the problem, that it's sound financially, but even more important, it's sound morally and ethically. And it's very disheartening to see even our local institutions not getting it, and in their calculus of figuring out whether we should divest or not, they're still looking at a few pennies here or a few pennies there in the midst of investing in and supporting these destroyers of the planet.
Yeah.
And they're basically saying, the fuck you's okay.
Yeah. Well, it's important for people to remember and to realize, and it's not a real common portrayal of American history, but for the needs of working people, from even in Vermont, conservative business owners used to keep children chained to machinery 16 hours a day in the Connecticut River Valley, working in mills. That was through people, in the streets demanding change, is what helped to bring out our child labor laws. From the women's suffrage movement, as you mentioned before, the civil rights movement, the entire labor movement that lasted for 40 years. Later on, our environmental movement and anti-war movements, to more recent climate justice movements. The political classes have never, ever done anything for us without people being in the streets first. Never, not even one circumstance. In the most meaningful changes for the average for the average needs of working people and for expanding rights to more and more, just basic human rights to more and more people. None of that ever happened without people in the streets demanding change. And conservative people, who I call them conservative, I don't really see much conservation in the philosophies, but people that are self-described conservatives actually have fought and resisted every single one of those changes. Fought to keep children chained to machines, fought to keep women from being able to vote, fought to keep African Americans from being able to vote or being accepted as human beings, fought to keep dumping chemicals into the rivers, fought to keep dumping carbon into the atmosphere. I mean, we have to be really, really honest in our language and realize that the needs of businesses are in direct conflict with the needs of people. And you can, be blindly dedicated to your brands and be, a good corporate, person marching in step. But at a certain point, it's the same thing. It's the war mentality, which, I'm kind of a little bit of a pacifist. I'm also sort of probably like a communist guerrilla. But so I get that. I get the fighting back part. But, it's very, very structural, and it runs right to the very top of the way we have ourselves organized. We got to kick some ass, and I'd say a critical mass, which I describe, as the smallest number of people it would take to sustain meaningful change in the world. I remember Martin Luther King one time said, "Give me 5%," when he was being criticized by his own African American community that possibly you only had 5 or 7%, Dr. King. Can we really pull anything off? And he said, "Give me that 5% and we'll change this." So, not to go on too long, but that's what it takes. I mean, we don't need everybody to make and sustain that meaningful change. People will come along when courageous people take that political step, and that's why I like, these activist groups. I mean, somebody needs to take the bull by the horns. I mean, I'm just full of analogies today. But.
Right. And I think you're right that it has to be a political step, that getting people to make changes in their own life, how they use energy, how they drive, other things. It's really important to do that, and I don't want to downplay that. But individual action alone is not going to turn the tide. It's too big a change, and we need to do it in too short a time. So we need to get people to basically to go to war. And it's, this is not an armed conflict, but it's a war against business as usual. And to go to war and demand from our political leaders that they go to international treaty negotiations in good faith, that we're not here to make sure that China doesn't get ahead of us, or this country doesn't do that, or fails to do this. It's to go in good faith with the other leaders of the world to save humanity. It's really that basic. It's really that basic.
The entire ecosystem is in threat. Everything that supports and brought us to the point where we actually are here. We come from these natural systems around us, getting through some of the ritual and hyperbole. We come from these natural systems.
Yeah.
That's pretty clear and obvious.
I mean, there's I forget who quoted this. I'm gonna butcher it, but here goes. There's a quote that's the time has come where it's not about changing our light bulbs anymore. It's about systemic change broad. And I think that what you were saying is completely true. Like, these individual actions are important, but the importance of switching your light bulbs and recycling and driving 5 miles per hour slower than you normally would is not for the impact that they have. And even to a certain extent, divestment, like take, UVM for example, like UVM divesting from fossil fuels, that one act that's not going to stop climate change.
Right.
Like, that one act won't. But the importance behind it is the symbolicness of, like, if UVM were to divest, the realization that this community of people in power is going to listen to their constituents and listen to their students. And the fact that UVM is refusing to listen to a clear, logical, well thought out, reasonable presentation of the majority. I would say that the majority of students, when put to a vote, would say they want to divest.
Right.
But
and
they're not
faculty
listening.
and staff as
and
well.
Faculty and staff, right. And so the fact that that UVM, their board of trustees, is refusing to divest, not only is bad because all of our endowment is still being fed into the fossil fuel industry, but also the fact that these people that have this power are just kind of saying "fuck you" to us as their people, and so that sort of same with the local government is just kind of giving us all the middle finger in that, with things like the pipeline campaign that Rising Tide is helping to organize against the Vermont gas pipeline. We turned out 500 people to the public hearing in Middlebury back in September, and we had, we have this giant postcard of all these signatures. We have all of this, like the public support is just incredible. It's overwhelming, and that 3 people can say, "Oh, we hear you,
but fuck you."
But fuck you. It's ridiculous.
It shows you that they do not have their asses on the fire hard enough. Political pressure on those at a certain level, there's a breaking point where they'll buckle.
But who has their asses on the fire? It's the corporations. They're they're in each other's pockets.
They push. I wanted to just mention a couple of statistics here that I thought were really important. From 1991 to 2012, out of 13,950 peer-reviewed climate studies, only 24 of those studies over those decades reject global warming, and none of those are recent. So recently, there's been about 9,136 peer-reviewed authors in recent years, and 1 out of that 9,136 rejects global warming, and mainly what they're objecting is the anthropogenic or human-caused aspect of it. They're not disputing global warming anymore. So one thing that the climate deniers, and I know a lot of well-meaning people that I have conversations with are, but when it all boils right down, I'm a climate denier, because it's that deconstruct, reconstruct that you have to go through to realize that a lot of the stuff that I believe in is actually wrong, and a lot of stuff that I used to think was crazy is actually right. And I think people really have a hard time on their own deconstructing their belief system and then rebuilding it. There was a really good quote here. "Democracy is utterly dependent upon an electorate that is accurately informed. In promoting climate change denial, industry and their cronies are doing more than endangering the environment. They are undermining democracy. By intentionally sowing seeds of divisive confusion, capital will win short term, but we're all going to get fucked in the end." So I just realize, the climate denial stuff too, which is it's another trick. There's constantly dripping and sowing those seeds of doubt when 1 in 9,136 recent peer-reviewed studies.
Yeah.
It's
the science
bizarre.
is clear. It's not that we know everything, but we know enough that we know what to do. We don't know exactly what the impacts are going to be, 50 or 100 years down the road, but we know they're going to be bad, even in the best case scenarios. There's going to be a lot of death and destruction and catastrophe and misery, even in the best case scenarios. We've already committed through, what we put into the atmosphere over the last, especially the last 50 years, but the last, 100 or 200 years.
Right.
So the science is clear, and the solutions are pretty clear too. It's just getting enough people motivated to really make this a movement, like civil rights was a movement, like feminist rights was a movement. And the battle's going to be fought on lots of different fronts, but people have to realize that they're in a battle, that life as usual, business as usual is collaboration with the enemy.
Yeah.
And that you have to sort of stake your claim that I'm going to war, I'm going to do my part. And in a wartime effort, everyone does their part. Some play little roles, some play big roles, but they're all moving in the same direction. And we haven't gotten there yet, but we need to pretty quickly.
I think.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think that one of the problems, like the reason that we know the problem, we know the solutions. Like, there's that jump between these broad stroke solutions that we know are going to fix everything if we completely restructure our public transportation system, if we completely switch over to renewables and cut our consumption, like all these things that we like have the technology to do and have, but what we're lacking is the individual and political will and the empowerment of individual people as to say, how can I as one individual enter in and affect this big system that's overwhelming and oppressive. And so you have all these individuals looking for those answers as to how to fight this fight, and then the dominant culture, which is controlling the media and controlling the answers that these people have, are given, is saying, oh, do these things. And so then you have all these well-intentioned people, like you said, they're fighting for the other side, but they have all the best intentions. It's just the goals that they have are not, going back to the pipeline, like natural gas is being pegged as renewable and as sustainable for some whatever reason. A bridge, which is completely ridiculous, but then all these well-intentioned people are going into the natural gas industry without realizing that they're fighting for the other side. So finding some sort of a way, and I really like what you said, like a concrete, tangible thing of building more public spaces.
Yeah.
More spaces for these kinds of discussions and organizing to happen, and enlightenment, so that people can realize that there are other ways of obtaining facts and other ways of coming up with solutions or means of getting to these great, wonderful solutions that we could have to stop climate change. And those aren't the ways that we are told are.
Yeah, that's when I coined that term that I used in my little rant and roll there, not enlightened self-interest, but an enlightened collective interest. We
Right.
need to enlighten ourselves. We have to do the hard work of doing the organizing. Nobody's going to take us by the hand and say, okay, folks, here's your giant meeting places. Do the best you can and then come after us. Nobody's
Right.
going to do that in a position of power. So it is up to us. I mean, we're the ones that have to kick some ass. I mean, we have to. And just in a media like this, like what you and I and Kira are doing here tonight, I mean, just think about it. If every public access cable station in the United States had weekly shows, not like our critical mass TV, but just similar, common sense, issue-oriented shows. And I'm not saying there's not a lot of them, but we have to develop our own kind of medias. We have to get information out there. I always point out, like in the New York Times, do people think it's an accident that there's no labor section in the New York Times? I mean, there's massive business news, a whole bunch of gobbledygook about very issues picked out of context and stuff about foreign policy and political stuff and intrigue and shock and titillation stuff. But there's not one section in there that teaches you and I and him how to organize together, which would be a liberal media. The media being liberal is an absolute myth also. The most conservative corporations on the earth are some of our biggest media conglomerates. 6 companies now own the entire media of the United States, and they're using it like a brain mill. I mean, we're being brainwashed.
Yeah,
So-
I think along those lines, a really important message for the climate movement is, how do we message? How do we get out a clear message that this is serious, folks?
Yeah.
Let me just give a very quick anecdote, because I
Sure.
know we're approaching the end.
You got 2 minutes.
In South Burlington, where I live, the superintendent announced that they were going to move 5th graders to the middle school year after next. People organized amazingly quickly. Literally hundreds of parents came together and formed a group to fight this, which they saw as a threat to their kids. And I'm thinking to myself, what bigger threat to our kids is there than the habitability of the planet? Yet it's just not on people's radar screens because we're so tied up in our day-to-day and making a living and taking care of the kids and, shuttling people from one activity to the next, that sometimes the gorilla in the room remains unseen. That
Yeah.
it's the biggest threat of any threat to our kids, yet something, you know, in a dance class or a Little League game or a change of how our kids go to school gets people really excited and charged up and energized because they can wrap their hands around it.
You're right.
We have to message this.
I got 30 seconds, Fred.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. But one thing you did point out is that people organized. They saw a present and a clear present danger. They organized and they were working to solve it. So that's it for us tonight at Critical Mass TV. Thank you, Fred. Thank you, Kira. I think that was a great conversation. And we will not say fuck you to our audience. We're going to say goodbye, and we love all of you. So have a great night. Bye-bye.